we go. Well, welcome everyone and participants. Thank you for joining our webinar for Documentaries and Environmental Movements, the Power of Film to Educate, Mobilize, and Inspire Change. This is a part of a webinar series that is part of our Trees and Seas Festival. I'm Julie Anderson, CEO of Plastic Oceans International. We've put together this festival, Trees and Seas Festival, to bridge land and sea conservation. We are hosting over 30 locations of tree plantings and beach cleanups with over 100,000 trees being planted, over 100 beach and forest cleanups. We also have 30 plus workshops, film screenings, and music performances happening around the globe. And we also have over a dozen panel discussions. All of these webinars are being brought to you free of charge and wouldn't be possible without our presenting sponsor, Montes Wine. I'd like to remind all of the participants at the end of this panel, we will randomly be selecting 5 people to receive a free hardcover edition of Living Without Plastic. It's a book that was put out by Plastic Oceans and Artisan Books. And winners will be announced at the very end of the panel event. And this is supposed to be an interactive, a dialogue. So please write your questions in the Q&A box below in the Zoom control, or also you can leave your questions on the chat in YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn, depending on where you're coming in from. Again, I just want to thank all of our panelists right now. These are an incredible group of panelists here joining us for the Documentaries and Environmental Movements. Our panelists of renowned filmmakers, and they're going to discuss real stories of how powerfully films can engage and influence viewers and why they are efficient communication tools for movements and NGOs. I'd like to introduce our panelists today. We have our moderator, William Pfeiffer. He's the executive chairman and co-founder of Globalgate Entertainment. He is a pioneer of local language film and television content production, distribution, and TV channels. He's also the board president of Plastic Oceans International. We also have Craig Leeson. He is a master communicator who draws from over 30 years of experience as a journalist, filmmaker, activist, and adventurer. He is the director of the award-winning documentary A Plastic Ocean and the soon-to-be-released The Last Glaciers. We also have Sergio Rapu, and he has produced the documentary specials and series that have aired on History Channel, Discovery, National Geographic, and PBS. Eating Up Easter, his award-winning directorial debut, was screened around the world and broadcast in US, Canada, New Zealand, Germany, and France. We also have Deia Schlossberg. She made the national news in October 2016 when she was arrested and charged with 45 years worth of felonies for filming Shut It Down pipeline protest in North Dakota. She also released her directorial debut of The Story of Plastic. And last but not least, Louie Schwartzberg, an award-winning cinematographer, director, and producer who has spent his career providing breathtaking imagery using time-lapse, high-speed, and macro cinematography techniques. He is the creator of the popular series Moving Art and the director of Fantastic Fungi. I'd like to thank all of you, and thank you, panelists, for joining.
Thank you, Julie. This is really, really wonderful to have you all here. This is a dream team panel. Just so happy to have Plastic Oceans bring us all together on this fine day. I love the work of everyone on this panel, you know, and you've all had a huge impact on my view of the world. I mean, Louie, when I watched Fantastic Fungi, you will say it correctly. You know, it really changed the way I look at the world, and your time-lapse photography, I just thought was amazing and all of that. But the story was just so intriguing and such an important part of our world that I really had no awareness of. I'm curious to know, how do you go about choosing the subject matter that you do? I mean, how did you come about thinking about making such an interesting, eye-opening movie?
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I think it's a lifelong journey that I've been on to try to really unveil the mysteries of nature and nature's intelligence. And so, if I'm time-lapsing flowers, which I've been doing for 4 decades, nonstop, 24 hours a day, to Wings of Life, which was a Disney nature film I did about pollination, the intersection between the animal world and the plant world. It gives us the food we need to eat. And I just keep on asking the bigger question, what do plants need? Well, they need soil. Where does soil come from? Nobody knows that answer. Well, fungi. Fungi breaks down organic matter and creates soil. Without
Fungi,
soil,
you heard it here.
yeah. Well, scientists like to say the J fungi, but we're in Hollywood. We swing both ways. So it can be either, but plants need soil, and without soil, no plants, no way to capture solar energy and make food, fuel, and medicine. And I discovered so much in making the film, like it's a natural solution for climate change. The fungi stores the carbon under the ground. It has this symbiotic relationship of plants and trees, and it's just one of the mind-blowing things you discover, how everything is interconnected, all these ecosystems. Same thing with the ocean. The plankton is one of the greatest ability to sequester CO2. And these complex, these interrelationships between ecosystems is what enables life on our planet to flourish. And whatever we do to one aspect, we do to ourselves. So that's what drives me, and I try to find a creative way of telling that story. And a lot of these stories are hidden below the surface, also because they're so obvious. And maybe what's obvious we don't explore.
Well, it's so interesting about the fungi, how potentially they could solve a problem that our three other panelists have delved into in such great depth. Of course, Craig with the plastic ocean, and Deia with the story of plastic, and then Sergio with eating up Easter, all dealing with the problem of plastic pollution in the ocean, which is really what Plastic Oceans International is so focused on in terms of creating the awareness and finding solutions, to this huge problem of plastic pollution in the ocean. I just wonder, asking you all, did any of your movies influence any of the others to perhaps look at something in a different way? Or is everybody sort of working in a bubble and it was coincidental that you had similar thoughts and themes among your movies? Deia, did you happen to see a plastic ocean, and did that have any influence on you wanting to make the story of plastic in any way? How did you come up with your idea to make that great movie, which, by the way, is incredibly hard hitting?
Thank you. Actually, it did affect the angle we took, because there have been amazing films that address plastic pollution in the ocean. And so we kind of wanted to lean into the front side of the plastic story, where it comes from, and the connection to fracking and the impacts on humans and the environment from extraction all the way through pollution, and it's the problems it creates in the environment. Because we hadn't really seen the whole life cycle of plastic portrayed. Most of media has focused on the very end stage, and there's egregious violations of human rights and environmental destruction, from the very beginning of its inception.
Well, you threw yourself out there. You got arrested while shooting the pipeline, with the oil and so on. How did that come about? You talk about sacrificing for your art, for your craft.
Yeah, that wasn't an intentional sacrifice.
I know. I suppose.
I was I was kind of caught up in. There was a state of emergency declared in North Dakota at that time because of the Standing Rock pipeline protest. And although my arrest wasn't at Standing Rock, it was covering an action that was done in solidarity with Standing Rock, shutting down the Keystone pipeline. And I was just there documenting, and I was caught up and arrested with everybody, but also charged with felonies. Just
for doing your job. I mean, for
doing my job.
for being a journalist, in essence,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. And it was kind of, it kind of became this flashpoint of environmental journalists just doing what we do, and seemingly trying to be silenced for that. So that was, I just felt like it was an important story to cover, but it kind of turned into this whole other issue.
No such thing as bad publicity.
Well,
maybe you put a spotlight on what you're doing a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And I noticed that a bunch of celebrities appealed to Barack Obama to sort of get you out of the pokey, including Neil Young, who is a great rock and roller. And when I think of great rock and rollers, I also think of Craig Leeson, who is the guitar player in a great band called Uranus, I happen to know. But, Craig, in your filmmaking, you really sort of opened up, I think, the world to this idea of the issues of plastic pollution with your movie, A Plastic Ocean. And Deia went very hard at the oil companies and so on. How do you find the balance between going, way right or way left, and trying to figure out which angle to take in a story so that you're not turning off people immediately? I mean, sometimes, say, Michael Moore, whose movies I think are really well made, but sometimes because it's Michael Moore and the way he goes at it from the position of the left, the right just turns off and probably doesn't watch that movie, and maybe doesn't have the impact. How do you balance your viewpoints or various viewpoints to have the maximum impact for your movies? Because your movie had a huge impact, and we can see all the laurels of A Plastic Ocean, I think, just above your head there. You've won 16 or 17 or whatever, Best Picture awards with that movie. How did you come to the direction you took?
As a journalist, but you can take multiple approaches, as you've said. And as an investigative journalist, I've done just about all the approaches, and I've seen the results of them. But with A Plastic Ocean, because that story was brought to me, and it was something that I was unaware of when it was brought to me as a story concept for a film, it opened my eyes up to the problem. And what I found interesting was that as a surfer and someone who studies the ocean, is a diver, grew up on the beach, and has an affinity with the marine environment, I was very surprised that I didn't know about the problem. So I wanted to approach it in a similar way with the audience, the awareness that I was getting. So as we literally started filming, when we realized that there hadn't been a lot of science or exposure about the problem when we started in 2010, it took 8 years to make the film. I thought that the best way to tell the story was to take the audience on the journey that we were going on as a film crew. And as we got into the story, we found that we just had more and more questions. So the film just kept going. The original plan was to film it in a year and get the film out within about 2 years. And it was supposed to be focused on the marine environment, hence the name Plastic Oceans. But as we kept going, we found out more information that this was a land-based problem. That's where it started from. And it was actually coming back through the food chain and affecting us all in this horrible human health activity as we consuming other animals that are being exposed to it, or even plants, as we know now, just even breathing the air. We can be taking in fibers, plastic fibers. It's in our tap water. It's in almost everything. In 100% of placentas that were studied in America recently in a study that came out. It was found in every single study case. So I wanted to bring that awareness to people in exactly the same way. In the film, and unusually for me as an investigative journalist, because I do usually like to call people out where I think they've created, or companies where they've created a problem. I didn't name one company as being responsible. I didn't think we had to. The idea was to get people to think deeply about where this stuff was coming from, how it had entered their lives, how they were using it, and the consequences that that was causing. And we also wanted to bring everybody to the table, because what was important in the third act was having solutions. So we approached plastic manufacturers. We wanted to talk to them. We wanted to bring them to the table and be part of the conversation. Initially, they ignored us because they thought we were doing a hard-hitting investigative piece. Eventually, they came around and they became part of the conversation about their responsibilities. And, you know, there's still corporations that are very responsible and irresponsible in what they're doing in terms of packaging and are looking the other way still. And there's a lot of greenwashing going on. But we wanted to start the conversation to begin with. So the film was about awareness, not about, at that point, pointing the finger and accusing people of wrongdoing.
Very, very interesting. You know, you think about how movies have an impact. And I have to say at Plastic Oceans, you know, we did this movie called Against the Current, where this amazing South African swimmer was the first person, a woman, to swim around Easter Island. And that was very much influenced by Sergio's movie. We looked at his movie, Eating Up Easter. And, you know, Sergio, you know, that very much opened our eyes to this whole problem of plastic pollution in Easter Island, this place in the middle of the ocean, which I always had thought was this pristine place with these incredible Moai statues. What you've done in this movie is sort of take the viewer on this sort of journey, understanding the history and the culture of Easter, and then bringing a highlight to the message, which I thought you did so beautifully. It's really such an educational view with so many different layers of interest in it. How do you come to sort of bridge that cultural divide between, you know, what's going on the ground with people's lives, and then the message that you're trying to make, and not make anybody look bad, because your dad's in the movie. Tell us more about how you came across making Eating Up Easter.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we didn't set out to make a plastic documentary. It was never a thought until we got into it. In fact, Eating Up Easter was going to be a documentary about food sustainability on Rapa Nui on Easter Island, which is the most isolated island in the Pacific. And then it sort of turned into just this idea around development and how development has happened, and sort of the conflict that we're now having there culturally, with language, with just sort of different social processes that are coming in that we've never had before, and in trying to find our characters, and also trying to visualize, like, how do you visualize modernization? How do you visualize development? Ultimately, it's food packaging, because you're bringing in food not from where you're growing it, not from locally, not from where it's made. And so this sort of surmounting like pile of plastic was continuously in our way as we talked to different characters, tried to find our story. Eventually, we settled on one character, Mama Pidu, who is probably the strongest character in our film, who deals with this issue. But it was, I think we always started around the people, because that was a big pillar for us. We needed to put Native Rapa Nui faces on screen, which doesn't happen too often. And then in doing so, the audience, has an emotional connection with these individuals. And especially with Mama Pidu, her passion for getting rid of trash, like in sort of this never ending wash of microplastics on our island, became such a powerful thread in the film. The film itself actually doesn't have a lot of plastic in it, but I would say with every screening that we have, like everybody has this sort of visceral gut reaction to it, and especially to the poster. You put something as sort of fragile and ancient as a moai, as these statues, on this big pile of plastic, and then all of a sudden it kind of gives the audience a different perspective. The funny thing is that the issue that we're dealing with on Rapa Nui is being felt across the Pacific, and we all know that on every single line, anything that touches the ocean. But I think what made our film stand out was because we had this history, this culture, that all of a sudden people were like, oh shoot, like that's happening there, I don't know if that answers your question, but that was kind of like how we got to plastic. You can't get away from it.
Well, the thing that was so saddening was that a lot of the plastic is flowing to you. You're in one of these plastic gyres. When I talk about you, meaning Easter Island, and it comes from all over the world on the beach. And Sarah Ferguson in our movie Against the Current was going through the beach after she had swum around and finding all this plastic, and we did some cleanups. It was just so shocking to see that you could see it was very old plastic that had been in the ocean forever, flowing there. And then at the same time, they're flying in all of these plastic bottles and all these plastic containers into Easter Island to take care of the tourists. So it's you're getting hit by these bottom and top levels. And with the problem of plastic, I mean, we're all here, I think, making movies to make the world a better place, to find solutions, to motivate people to change, and you can hit people at the grassroots level to take a what do you call these, a metal bottle, here you can't see it, so I don't focus, blurry, versus a plastic bottle. But in some places of the world, they don't have potable water, so they need to have a plastic bottle, because the only way they can get clean water to survive, as opposed to getting sick from drinking the dirty water that's available. And so you can hit them at that level, at the ground. You can hit people at the government level to try to change laws. You can sort of go after the corporations. I mean, Deia, I think pointing out that Shell and Exxon and some of these fossil fuel companies should be taking responsibility, as you mentioned in the story of plastic, is, I think, a very strong point. And I personally sort of agree totally with that, and feel like the government should step in, because to put all the blame on the people, or to say you've got to change it, as I think the industry tried to do over time, just didn't seem fair. It seemed like they're sort of diverting people and trying to confuse them. Where do you find the solutions to the problem? I mean, you covered it so well. Maybe you can sort of highlight some of the ways to try to give people an idea of what we all could be doing who are watching this panel to make a difference.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the main goals of the film was to dispel some of these myths about the plastic problem and why it's a problem and who's responsible for it. And as you said, and as we say in the film, industry likes to put blame on the individuals, and it keeps us as individuals looking down and looking at our own actions, and looking at us as consumers and thinking we can solve this by our consumer decisions. And that's not the case. We are humans, we are citizens well before we are consumers. And industry is happy with us seeing it as a lifestyle choice problem, because then we don't look up, we don't look at the powers that be and who's benefiting enormously from the production of this material and the results of all this pollution. And so I think, I mean, the solutions have to, I mean, not just top down, not just government, but what we can do as individuals is be citizens and work together, work with our communities, look at legislation, look at regulation. But bottom line, this stuff has to stop being made. It has to stop coming out of the ground and being produced. And all the cleanup in the world, I mean, we're at a point where that cleanup isn't really, it's not a viable solution by any means. We have to stop making it. There's more plastic, there has been more plastic made in the last 15 years than at all time before that. So the production has been ramping up ever since the fracking boom, really. And it's like, we've got this visual metaphor in the film that is emptying out a bathtub with a teaspoon while the faucet is on full blast and it's overflowing, and you just need to turn off the tap. So we need regulations to stop the build out of infrastructure, stop the investment in extractive industries.
And was that the goal of your movie, the story of plastic, to try to get the government leaders to look at it? Because clearly the corporations who are responsible are looking the other way and trying to divert blame, it seems. Was it in your mind to try to get it to people who could implement legislation? And if so, how would you go about doing that? Getting the film in front of them to have them understand the problem, first of all, so they could make change?
That was partially the impetus, but also to direct attention to where I think it should be, which is on the people that know the most about the effects and what's causing these problems. And that is largely the people on the ground. And it's not just what I think our film does well is highlight the global movement that are people and organizations working on all different aspects of this problem and working together. So bringing knowledge from one part of the world to another, and largely knowledge from the global South, the countries that are being taken advantage of by these companies, and listening to people with firsthand experience, and not like experts from the global North coming in and seeing what the solution should be, as has been the case with so many global problems before that the global North is largely responsible for in the first place.
So, hey, William, can I jump in for a sec?
Please,
Yeah.
This is very interactive. You guys can ask questions to each other, and it's like Mycelium, the network effect.
Well, exactly. I applaud my fellow filmmakers for doing the important investigative, work. And I really agree, like the mycelial network, we learned that ecosystems flourish when there's a shared economy under the ground where nutrients are shared without greed. That's nature's operating instructions. I think that also one of the challenges and goals has to be to give people hope. And I'm just going to be objective here for a moment, that a lot of environmental films, unfortunately, people don't want to go to them because it could be a downer, and it hurts. They don't know, I don't want to see elephants being killed, and I don't want to see whales being killed. I mean, people come up to me and say that, and it's shocking, because the whole point is to share this information. And so, like with Fantastic Fungi, for example, we land on solutions. I just talking with them, even from Ecoveda, they use mycelium to replace plastic packaging, the styrofoam that goes in stuff. He actually just raised 100 million, and he's licensing that technology to people around the world to create mycelium to replace plastic packaging, insulation, coffins to be buried in? I mean, when you die, don't you want to be, nutrients, or do you want to end up embalmed and, rot inside of a cement box? So what I loved about the reaction when we went indie and distributed the film ourselves in theaters is
I think, Louie, we lost you for a minute. You're frozen.
people to fall in love.
Louie,
With
your
nature.
audio went out for Louie, your audio went out for about 10 seconds. Could you roll back what you just said about 10 seconds earlier? Sorry.
Oh, 10 seconds. Yeah, I just want to say that I'm trying to get, I want to inspire people to have hope and look at solutions. And this, that, beauty is nature's tool for survival because you protect what you love.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the messaging, the environmental movement, of which I've done a lot of PSAs, and I'm proud of all that work, has failed. Because if you put the truth and the science in front of people, especially in this fake news world that we live in, it doesn't work. So you have to have some other form of impact to the tipping point we are right now. The science alone doesn't work as a communication tool.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very important point. And
if I can talk to that, William,
please.
I agree with both. Deia, straight away, I agree with her. We've got to ban single-use plastics. Just there's no other way to get out of this problem.
Yeah.
And recycling was a con, and it was for the reasons that Deia said about blaming the consumer. It took the focus off manufacturers so that they were able to continue making plastic products. But to Louie's point, I agree with Louie that the problem I thought we were going to have with the plastic ocean was just by the very name of the film, we were going to turn people away. So who wants to go and see a film about plastic? And so the first 8 minutes of the film, you don't actually see, hear, or think about plastic. We don't mention it. I don't show it. What you do see are blue whales swimming in the Indian Ocean. And we start with these beautiful big shots. We're the first people to film juvenile blue whales underwater at that time. And I tried to make it very much look like a nature-based film, beautiful big shots, lots of lovely animals, so that people got into the film and got into a certain comfort level until we showed at that 8 minute mark the plastic floating on the surface where the whales were feeding, and then starting to introduce the concept of what does that mean and what is this stuff. So I do think it can be very important. It is very important in the way you tell films, in the way that you structure films, and in the language that you use for films. So particularly where you've got very dense science, such as the film we're making at the moment, The Last Glaciers, which is coming out very soon. The climate science is extremely dense. And what I found in doing research for the film, particularly trying to understand why people deny that the climate crisis is a man-induced, human-induced crisis. I started to understand that a lot of it had to do with the language. The science is so dense, and it's very difficult to explain the science to people in very simple terms that everybody could understand. So I see our role as filmmakers as being translators to a great degree, translating the science into stories that everybody can understand, that they don't have to run to a science book to try and get it, or where their eyes just suddenly glaze over because the concepts are too difficult to get their heads around. So I think it's very important, particularly for young filmmakers. When I'm talking to young filmmakers, I get them to have a really good look at the way that they structure their language and how they actually translate the information into something that is informative, entertaining, but mostly understandable from very young audiences to all the way through. So you're hitting as many demographics as you possibly can.
I
that you were
love.
able, please, Sergio.
Oh, sorry, I'm gonna cut you off.
No, please go for it.
I really love where this conversation is going. I completely agree, and really kind of inspired by a lot of you in sort of the approaches that you're taking in connecting with audiences. I think, you know, and just kind of looking at like some of the stuff that's happening in the chat too. Like, I think we as filmmakers realize that there are so many other media, there's so many other ways of telling stories, from Instagram posts to you know, academic journals, magazines, like who's been to a library recently? There's a bazillion books still in there, right? And so I oftentimes I find what we do as being sort of the way that we emotionally connect with audiences to engage them into asking more questions. And when they are starting to ask more questions, then they can seek out those academic journals and those other books and things. But you're right, it's about engaging people in the onset, right? And engaging them emotionally to care about a topic and want to learn more. And the struggle that I have, and the kind of question that I wanted to throw back at all of you was, how do you tell stories not to preach to the echo chamber? You know, we're so divided right now, especially in this country. And oftentimes the people in power are not in the same echo chamber of the space that we are telling stories in. So how do you reach those people in power? How do you tell stories that is not already polarizing from the onset?
I think you have to find common ground, and there's a lot of things like we want the best for our children. You know, we want to have clean water and clean air. I mean, can we agree on that? I mean, in a way, I think, you know, nature films or films about the environment should be the bridge conversation that can bridge, you know, polarization. Do we want healthy? Do we want good food? You know, every day we eat, right? We want to save the bees. Come on, you know, what does that mean? Get rid of pesticides. I think that if you come on to people like, right, like, hey, I'm an environmentalist. This is like this, you know, message we're trying to, you know, lay on you. You're going to turn people off. But if you want to just say, you want the best for yourself, for your children, for your future, I think most people will agree. And that begins the conversation. And then you can create that bridge. And I think we have a great opportunity with these kinds of films to be able to engage people, to listen and build community, you know, as we talked about earlier. I mean, one of the things I want to also point out, when we have a film like this, it isn't just like a one-off. We keep on making these one-offs. It should be a franchise. So what I'm doing is we create like an educational curriculum. We're going to give that away for free, K through 12, teach kids, where does soil come from? You know, what is this mycelial network? And then I'm doing a summit October 15th, where I've interviewed all the experts in the world of fungi and soil and consciousness, because mushrooms can shift consciousness as well. And bringing all that into an event October 15th, where, you know, I'm calling it Voices from the Underground, 50 experts, a global event. People can, you know, come in and hear the conversation, you know. And I think that's what's cool about the movies and what we do is we enable people to gather and have a conversation, that there is a Q&A, that it's a safe place to talk about things, you know, and again, building community. What nature teaches you is that communities survive better than individuals. Hello, you know, and we got to get rid of this Darwinian idea of survival of the fittest, dog eat dog, kill or be killed, and that everything in nature is about connection, networking, nurturing, flourishing, more the feminine story of nature, not the macho story, which is a bullshit story that was created by imperialists back in 1930 to justify the colonization of other countries. That is not a true story. We need other stories.
Yeah, we interestingly, when it came to distributing A Plastic Ocean, we concentrated on kids as our main first focus, and we consciously tried to, with the screenings in cinemas, had matinee sessions first, where children could be taken to watch the films, because what we were hoping, and what actually did happen, was that the kids would watch the film and then they'd go home to their parents, and they'd say, Dad, why are you wrapping my sandwiches in plastic for me to go to school with? Don't you know what this plastic is doing to the food? So the parents would then go and watch the film with the kids, and then they'd take their grandparents. And so we did a lot of, I traveled around the world when the film was released, talking to schools primarily. We would go to schools. And interestingly, kids knew a lot more about the subject than the adults did. And what happened about 12 months, or actually about 8 months in, was at conferences that I was talking at banking conferences and financial conferences and corporate conferences. The panelists, and I had people like, I had the vice president of Exxon Chemicals on one panel discussion, and the vice president of Danone. And the Exxon vice president came up to me afterwards, and he said, you know, my kids watched your film, and they came home to me and said, Dad, why do you work for a company that's destroying the environment? And he said, I didn't have an answer. He said, I went to work and I sat and looked at my desk for half an hour thinking about what my kid had said to me. He said, because every parent wants to be a hero to their children. They don't want to be a villain. So I think that worked in that by reaching to get to the adults, we went through the children. And of course, along with education campaigns, which is what the Plastic Oceans Foundation has also done, you get kids at the very start of their lives where they need to understand about the effects of such products that are badly designed, like plastic, about the wonders of nature, such as fungi. And I'm so glad you've taught me how to say that properly. I'm going to be walking around for weeks now just saying fungi. And so I think it's very important that as filmmakers, yes, you also look at how you get your message out and how you target different demographics so that your message reaches as many people as possible and has the fullest effect that it possibly can. And we, like you said, Louie, we did that with children because we were hoping they'd drag their parents along. Because the problem with adults and my generation is that by the time you get to our age, you've developed habits, and single-use plastics are a habit. They're a habit that we develop from a very young age, certainly in my lifetime, and they become such a habit that you don't even know they're there. I mean, I had no idea that there was so much plastic in the oceans until I was bought this idea for a film. And then the very next day when I went surfing and I looked between my feet, I suddenly started seeing plastic bags. I saw different colored particles in the sand and the wind line on the beach. And I was gobsmacked at why I hadn't seen this problem before. And it was just because it had become a habit. So if you can educate children at a very young age, you can also reach the adults, and it's not too late for them either.
I think it's definitely, important for all of our films to have an educational component and curriculum associated with it. And Sergio, to go back to your question of how we reach people that aren't just in our choir, I think we don't, as far as reaching lawmakers, we don't have to get to everybody. We can, as long as we get to a few key people that are already going to bat for this issue, it will give them more fodder for their fight. We partnered with the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act bill writers. This was a bill introduced in Congress originally before the election and then reintroduced with this new sitting government that looks at the issue kind of from a 360 kind of view and introduces legislation to prevent new development, which was really exciting. But we partnered with the Congress people and senators that were working on this and had a screening in Congress, and it was really well attended, thankfully. And there were lots of aides and staffers there, like taking notes furiously. So I think, doing really targeted impact strategies can be really effective.
because, you know, I was speaking on behalf of Plastic Oceans International at Davos at the World Economic Forum, and was on, you know, various panels with companies that are some of the so-called culprits or villains, as you say, who are making all of this plastic material. And, you know, it's Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Coca-Cola, a lot of these companies were saying, and even the oil companies were saying, you know, they're doing research to come up with alternative materials. A lot of the alternative materials sound like they're maybe better, but they're really not much better, if you will. And at the same time, while they're saying they're doing the right things, they've got their PR people at Davos saying the right things. You read that they're spending millions of dollars to build factories in places like India at the time. I remember reading about literally the next day while I'm at Davos, and they're to build factories with even more plastic production capability to put, you know, millions of more tons of plastic into society that ends up in the ocean and inside our bodies, because it is hurting people. And you know, this notion of plastic is sort of a very serious one, as the oceans will soon have more plastic in them than fish in terms of tonnage. But certain problems like the environment, Craig, to the point you were making about the last glaciers, the clock is ticking. One of the questions that we got in the Q&A is that, you know, if we don't act now, the temperatures will rise, you know, another 1.5 degrees and it's over, you know, or if it goes further than that, over meaning the planet is too hot for a lot of people to survive. The glaciers will melt. People in the Himalayas and the Andes and so on that rely on that glacial water as a source of fresh water will not have a place to or not have water to drink, and therefore they won't have a place to live. You need water. And then as the sea levels rise, the people along the coast where a lot of people live are going to have to move to higher ground, because you know, you're going to have these sea levels rising and flooding their homes. I mean, Bangladesh, 160 million people will be literally underwater. Where are they going to go? Who's going to want them? How are they going to deal? How is the world going to deal with mass migrations of people because of climate change? And the time to solve the problem is very short. And how do we get that message across, both for plastics, for climate change, you know, where there is just time running out? It's going, the scales are tipping against us, and we need to sort of do something quickly. How do you think about going about making that message out there be heard and influential?
I think storytelling, I mean, obviously that's where our skill set is, and what we do is try and make our stories as impactful as possible and get them in front of the right people. I mean, with the Plastic Oceans, we you know, we managed to get that in the Senate, US Senate, under the Trump administration, which was quite unusual at that time. And it was chosen as one of the US's 50 showcase films and screened in 55 embassies around the world. We also cut a 22-minute version of the film, which we screened during lunchtimes at talks for the finance industry and corporations.
In the United Nations, I believe, right?
We premiered it at the United Nations in the US in front of 500 international delegates, and had a panel discussion, much as we're having right now. So I think if you utilize the channels that you have available to you through connections, and as Deia was saying, through people who are already working, politicians and leaders who are already working on these issues from within, and go through their channels, then we can get our stories into the hands of the right people. But ultimately, in my opinion and my view, it comes down to regulation and legislation. The problem corporations have is that they don't like unlevel playing fields because they believe it gives another player an advantage. Regulation and legislation, properly enforced, creates a level playing field where everybody's operating from the same base. And that tends to make life a lot easier for the corporations to do the right thing. A good example is Germany, when they legislated, and we highlighted that in the film, in 1991 to force plastic manufacturers to be be responsible for their plastic, and they created a closed loop system, which was then followed by other European countries. And what that did was it gave everybody clear instructions on how to operate. And I think that's what we need globally, is good legislation. We need to ban plastics. We could declare them toxic. That would make them fall under existing regulations, for example. So I do think it is. I think it is important that we reach leaders and corporate leaders, particularly because they also have a big influence on our political leaders.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, some of these things all come together. Like I know you're working on a film, Sergio, that takes into account freshwater pollution, climate change, you know, in the Great Lakes where you live. You know, tell me a little bit about your thought process in trying to highlight that issue and to get people to change, to clean up this source of water. Is it that 20% of the world's fresh water at the surface level is in the Great Lakes?
Is in the Great Lakes. Well, it's the biggest. I'm going to get it wrong, so maybe I won't say it, but it's, you know, in terms of surface freshwater, it's massive. It's massive. It's the biggest one in the U.S.
95% of the surface freshwater in the U.S. is in the Great Lakes.
Right. And so as you know, the climate warms, as all of these other things happen, this vital element for survival is being threatened, right? Like so many thought leaders have talked about the next, you know, wars will be around fresh water, not necessarily around oil. And so what's interesting though, is like here in the Midwest, typically there is little visceral reaction to microplastics in the ocean, right? It's this idea of like, oh, that's California's problem. We're not on the ocean. We're not contributing to that, you know, without realizing that here in Minneapolis, or here in Minnesota, where the Mississippi starts, like this is the great superhighway for plastic. All of these states sort of dump in not only plastic, not on purpose at times, but also waste and things into this source, right? This incredible source that eventually leads out into the ocean. I mean, we can't escape the earth for as many billions of dollars as some of us may have to take a 10-minute joyride. We're going to come back, at least for our lifetimes and the lifetime of our children. So I think bringing awareness in some of the ways that we're all talking about here, telling impactful emotional stories that make it in your backyard, in sort of the audience's backyard, as opposed to sort of the story that doesn't really relate to me, I think is the way forward, you know, and working in conjunction with other politicians, other leaders in the battlefield, with scientists also in the battlefield. This is communicative storytelling. Mm-hmm. We can't, you know, as so many of you guys have said, like, this is the web that needs to sort of support the planet, especially right now. It's urgent. It's incredibly urgent.
Yeah.
And I have dire sort of feelings of the future for my two little kids. So it's even, you know, it's in my backyard.
And look, as you guys pointed out earlier, we're at the tipping point. You know, we don't have a lot of time. We can't wait for another generation or two to evolve. 360.org says we have less than a decade, or we're cooked. But that's a really sad, you know, outlook. So it's really a lot of pressure, I think, on us, you know, filmmakers, to be able to shift behavior. And I think that, you know, obviously the politicians and government need to change, but one of the ways is grassroots. I mean, they only respond to like what the voters want. I think you need both, because they won't, if they're just, getting the money from lobbyists, and, that's a reality, but they still are affected by votes, I suppose, and political movements. And I think that's the key. Like one of the ways NASA got funding for their space program was to do those IMAX films, like The Dream Is Alive. And that got all, audiences turned on to space and the NASA program. And that encouraged funding by everybody being, loving these movies. It helped get funding through Congress, it's another like a small example of what can happen from the bottom up to influence government leaders.
Because some of the questions are about, what people can do then in the Q&A to impact the change. And I think it's important that people do vote with their wallet. And as I think you say that sometimes, Craig, where, in the film Plastic Oceans, you're talking about tell the stores not to package with so much plastic and styrofoam. Choose alternatives. Use your glass or metal bottles and so on. But what else can people do? One of the questions is, someone's very interested in having a career in this area. How would they go about getting into the area of environmental help? I mean, activism or just involvement. Any advice?
Yeah, get involved with your local political scene and your local NGOs. Join Plastic Oceans. Join science and nature based organizations, and develop your own curiosity and thirst for knowledge, because I think that's what filmmakers are. We're all inherently curious, and we are out seeking answers to our own questions, as much as the greater questions that we think that society needs to look at. But from the very start, for me anyway, it comes from within. I mean, the last Glaciers didn't start out as a climate change movie. It started out as an extreme sports film. And the reason it developed into a climate change story was because I went to the European Alps to start filming extreme sports athletes in the middle of winter, and there was no snow. Instead of white, it was brown. And when I started talking to the guides and people who'd lived in the villages there for decades, they were telling me that over the past 30 years, particularly, the glaciers were disappearing, and the snow was becoming less prominent, and there were increased number of deaths, because as the mountains heat up, they crack rock, and you get more avalanches and more destabilized mountains. And so I sought out some local scientists to back up those anecdotes and those stories. And the scientists that I actually stumbled upon was the oldest glacial institute in the world in Grenoble. And they told me about this ice core project that they were working on, where they're studying cores from glaciers all around the world. And within those cores are tiny bubbles that give a very accurate picture of what was in the atmosphere and the temperature of the atmosphere going back hundreds of thousands, millions of years. And so they know that man was responsible, humankind is responsible for climate change, because they can see exactly the point that the climate started to change, and things like nitrous oxide and methane and carbon dioxide started to increase because of the bubbles that are in these cores. And so just purely by going and chatting to people like that, I suddenly realized there was a far more important story to tell. And so the focus of the film turned into a climate change story, because once again, it was about awareness and my personal awareness. And so we then spent 4 years traveling to 12 countries, climbing mountains all over the world, going in with scientists to watch the data that they were collecting, the research they were doing, and to be beside them as they analyze that. And it is really scary when you go to somewhere like Peru, which in the 1990s had more than 700 glaciers counted by satellite. And 30 years later, they have less than half of those glaciers are left. And these are bodies of ice that took hundreds of thousands of years to form, and they're disappearing within decades. And these glaciers store our drinking water, 33% of it, and they also reflect heat back into the atmosphere and keep the earth cool. So when they're gone, we're not going to see them again, and we're also going to lose our drinking water, and we're also going to warm the planet, and that's going to lead to rising sea levels, which is already happening, and that means less habitable land. And there's very little, if you analyze the land that's actually habitable on the planet, there's very little of it, because we're actually an oceans planet, not a land planet. And a lot of the land is very arid and will become more so as seawater encroaches in agricultural space. So become engaged, talk to local scientists. If you want to be active, become a political leader in your local municipality and start change there. Join organizations and become active. And believe me, it's worth it, because the alternative, which is, as the head of the UN Environment Program says in The Last Glaciers, we have less than 10 years left to turn this around, or we are in dire straits, because we're already seeing the life support systems that keep us alive as a species collapsing. And we've seen the wild weather, extreme weather that's been happening all over the globe in the past week. And that's as a result of a heating planet. So extreme weather's always been there, but what happens as the Earth heats up is that extreme weather becomes more extreme. And as it was explained to me by an Oxford professor, it's like a striker in soccer or European football who may kick one goal every game and can be relied on to do that, suddenly giving him steroids and he's kicking 3 goals or 4 goals a game because he's had that boost. And that's what's happening to our weather all over the world right now.
That is very concerning. And that's what we want for people to understand. They really need to act quickly. They need to get involved at every level. But even at the level of plastic, I mean, you think about what can people do to help? Yes, we've talked about the obvious changes of habits, in terms of usage and rejecting, you need to recycle, reuse, and all of this kind of thing. Although recycling has been pointed out to be a bit of a farce, because less than 10% of plastics are really functionally recycled properly. And but maybe what we could ask people to do if they want to get involved, if they're a scientist or an engineer, a materials engineer, is to invent an alternative. I think Louie had mentioned that maybe mushrooms, mycelium, could be an alternative packaging source, that there might be some better materials out there. I think, Deia, you're saying turn off the tap and definitely stop making the plastic, but people need convenience from packaging and materials for drinking water and so on. Are there other materials, Deia, that you see out there on the horizon that might be alternatives? Do you have any inklings of some good news there that you've come across?
Yeah, I mean, we did interview one company that was doing some really exciting research in that realm. Yes, I agree that eventually we need to get there. And the major issue right now is scaling those things and making them competitive with fossil fuel-based plastics, which is something that, innovation and technology alone is not gonna do. It's gonna need a boost from politics, from more than just the goodness of the idea to break into this system. But I would say, just going back to like how people can get involved, I just wanted to highlight breakfreefromplastic.org. It's kind of an amalgamation of all different work in this area. So there's not just one way to plug in, there's a myriad ways to plug in. So that website is kind of like a hub and connects you to organizations in different regions, different topics. If you have different skill sets, like there's a place you can plug in. So I recommend going there.
Awesome, thank you. So Louie, you talked about packaging for alternative packaging that maybe fungi could be used, that mycelium could be used for packaging. I also remember from the movie how plastic can be eaten by mycelium, and does it really dissipate, or does it just become another problem? Does that really work?
Well, yeah, I think there's research, being done now, but mostly I think it's in the lab. I don't think we found like a larger effective solution. I do know that, bioremediation, fungi has been used, for cleaning up oil spills and toxic dumps, because what fungi does is it breaks down organic matter. Oil is organic matter. It's a decomposed forest. People don't think about it, but that's what it is. So what we need to do is like harness nature's energy to do the work. Like pesticides and agricultural practices, if they kill the mycelium, which is this network under the ground that connects plants and trees to one another, and you depend on fossil fuel for fertilizer, you're just killing the relationship, and then when the drought comes or whatever, all of a sudden, the plants die. Plants are the giant natural engine on planet Earth that takes CO2 from the atmosphere, releases oxygen, carbon goes into the leaves and the branches and the trunks, and 80% of it is sequestered under the ground. We just got to let nature do its thing and not break it up. I mean, there's been scientific studies that said if we stop putting CO2 into the atmosphere, hypothetically tomorrow, if you let the symbiotic relationship of photosynthesis with trees, plants on planet Earth, and mycelium do their work, you could clean the atmosphere in 5 years. So, there are solutions there. How do you shift behavior? It seems to be the major issue. Like, we've known these answers. Look at Earth Day 1970, everything we talked about for climate change, recycling, all the science is on the table for quite a while. Here we are at the 50th anniversary of all that. And I think as storytellers, we need to kind of ask ourselves, like, why hasn't it worked?
Yeah. I mean, the ecological movement, sort of started 50 years ago, as you say, Louie. And I've grown up in this world for the last 50 years where a lot of the blame and the responsibility has been, it seems, shifted to people, to communities who haven't organized to, sort of the grassroots level, when it seems as though the government's job is to protect us from foreign invasion, protect us from bad things, put police and firemen in place to protect the citizenry. And at the same time, I think they need to figure out how to protect us from ourselves, because we are obviously not doing enough on our own. And the governments, I believe, need to step in because the time is running out and the clock is ticking, and they really need to save us from hurting ourselves, because left our own devices, we're not getting it done, as we can see with the climate change and the pollution. We've got people who are asking questions from all over the world. I have to say, it's incredible the number of people that we have asking questions and commenting. They would like you all to include your organizations, like links to where you can be found. Maybe you can say them on the screen now, but also type them into the chat room area. There's a chat room and there's a Q&A for those people who are watching. So I've been reading more of the questions from the Q&A. If there are questions in the chat room, because there are hundreds of them, maybe you can stick them into the Q&A. But we are running out of time, so I just wanted to see if people can do that. One of the questions from Malaysia was, they go out and they've picked up tons of plastic on beach cleanups in Malaysia, and thank you for doing that. That's terrific. But the question was about the microplastics, which are in the sand and among the grains of sand. They can get the big pieces of plastic out, but not the little microplastic pieces, which get inside the animals, that get inside us ultimately, and that are all over. Is there any idea for getting the microplastics off the beaches, out of the ocean? Is mycelium an opportunity? How about these big, the boats that are out in there sort of hoovering things up and using it? Is any of that working? Ways to get plastics out of the ocean and the microplastics off the beach? Anything that you've seen, Sergio? I know that there's a lot of the stuff going into the Great Lakes over there that you've been researching. Any of you, are there any ideas for some of our questions out there for getting that level of plastic out?
No, is the answer. Microfibers are so small and pervasive. There is no technology that can clean it up, specifically target it without damaging, endangering, or killing other organisms in so doing it, which is why several of the ocean cleanup campaigns weren't going to work. The idea is to stop it getting into the ocean in the first place. And Deia spoke about turning the tap off, which is exactly right. We've just got to stop putting it there. The environment, it doesn't occur naturally in the environment, never has. The environment doesn't have a way of dealing with it quickly. Eventually it will, if we cause our own demise, which we're actually doing right now, and we're successful at that, the earth will go on without us, and very happily without us, and it will cleanse itself. And with the help of mycelium and other organisms, and without our interference, those plastics will eventually be crushed, compounded, and turned into oil and carbon again. And that will happen over the course of millions of years. But in our lifetime, no, we just don't have the technology that can specifically take out microfibers.
I think it's a little bit dangerous to focus on that too, because it takes resources and attention away from much more effective things we can be doing to combat this issue. And it also gives us a pass as individuals, as consumers, like as long as we can clean it up, it's fine, right? Like same kind of mentality as recycling. So yeah, it's frustrating seeing so many resources and so much coverage go into those things when they're long way off and not the answer we need right now.
I think what I kind of gravitate back to a lot is habit change, like personal habit change. It is an institutional thing, and we need support from big business and government. But then ultimately it comes down to personal impact and really personal preference. I live in Minneapolis and I eat avocados. We do not grow avocados here. So I love avocados. Maybe I just got to eat less avocados, And so it's like those kinds of questions, I think, that are becoming increasingly more important. What is made locally? How do I support locally so that there is less transportation, so there are less big trucks, so there are less fossil fuels? And granted, this is, I'm speaking in the middle of the US and the global north, not necessarily where there is a lack of drinking water, right? So use the plastic when you really need it. In spaces, in medical spaces where cleanliness is important, and it's an important enough material to use now until we find a different material, right? My milk does not come in big metal jars. Like, we've decided to use plastic for that. But then I also recognize, this is a huge tangent, but I also recognize that, like, in order for me to drink milk without plastic, I would need a cow in my backyard, right? So anyway, I think it's like thought processes of that, which are incredibly taxing, especially during COVID and with all the other busyness that we have in life. But it's useful, and showing other generations that we're that, and then you eventually sort of become influencers in your community around those habit changes.
Yeah, I think think local, grow local, support local. If you can't change the world, change your community, And I think, trying to expect, the government to change, again, that's kind of laying it off to this like other person, an other has to fix it. It is important, but the only way I think to get the government leaders to respond is to build community. I mean, look, what happened with Trump was the fact that we're all like in our little silo looking at Instagram or Facebook, and we were losing democracy. If you lose democracy, then we were totally screwed in terms of affecting any kind of government change. So the lesson I think we've learned in the last 5 years is that people have to organize, people have to build communities, and then indirectly then, elect the right leaders with the right values to make the right decisions so that everything we discussed here can work. So I think it's a bottom-up thing that everybody can do, everyone that's listening can do. Let local congressmen to have your values. And number one, if we lose democracy, we're totally done.
Well, a lot of I think that's a very strong statement, Louie, and very well said. There's a lot of scientists who are asking questions and who are online. Some of them doing research on enzymes that can eat up plastic, at least in the labs, and there's some work being done there. And so on the one hand, we want to encourage people to come up with solutions, to be hopeful for the future, to motivate them to try to make a difference so that it's not so dire that you just give up. But to try to come up with packaging solutions for cleaning up the microplastics on the beach, and don't give up. Keep trying. Where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
On the one hand, but on the other hand, we also want people to feel that it's super dire so that they take action, they vote, they write letters to their politicians, they make movies like you guys do to have these points of view and these strong messages presented in a way that people can understand, and that they'll be motivated to take action.
William, the plastics problem is a design fault. Plastic is a flawed design. Now, if we can design something like plastic, we can design our way out of it. And that's where we have to encourage young entrepreneurs with research, government research grants and subsidies. We have to encourage young people to become designers and to innovate and come up with, fungi-based packaging, for example. And so it is absolutely possible. If we can invent something as terrible as plastic, we can invent something incredibly wonderful to replace it. And that's what I think that ultimately, that's what will happen and is happening right now. And there is a brand new technology and design that's taking place all over the world to make that happen.
And in the Q&A and probably in the chat, there are a bunch of websites that people are offering. I haven't vetted them. I don't know if I can speak to whether they're working or not. But what's great about this panel is it is a mycelium network of thought and ideas, and so hopefully people can look and find ways to connect with the panelists and that with each other. There's a lot of stuff going on the Q&A and in the chat room where people are offering their links, and I encourage the panelists to do it, and we'll find ways to hook everybody up. Of course, the great resource is plasticoceans.org, plasticoceans with an S.org. And there's a lot there in terms of information, in terms of films, and community activity. There's the Trees and Seas initiative that they're doing, where they're planting trees, because trees and the oceans are closely aligned, and they're going on right now in Mexico, in Chiloé Island, and in Chile, and around the world. These Trees and Seas activities that Plastic Oceans are doing, which are fantastic initiatives, and you locally in those countries can do them, and you can start your own programs, events in your countries to try to get things done, planting trees, cleaning the oceans. And there's the Blue Communities initiative that Plastic Oceans has, whereby your community, your town, your village, your city can get information and presentations and films that are made by Plastic Oceans and by others, because Plastic Oceans, I think, has made about 12 films in the last year or so at various levels, trying to educate people in different ways about the issues. Use the presentation materials that the organization has. Get out there, speak to your kids, your schools, your politicians, your corporations, your parents, people who will listen or people who don't want to listen. Just keep going at it, because the clock is ticking, the time is short. If we don't do it, who will? And I really thank these great filmmakers for all that they've done to bring these important issues. They're going to keep making great movies. We all need input, feedback. So I applaud all of you. I thank you deeply from my heart. For me, for my sons, Alexander and Ethan, for their children and all the others in the future, we've got to keep trying. There's hope, but it's a dire situation. So don't sit back in your easy chair and feel like you can chill out and it's all going to get done by somebody else who's going to come up with a solution. You, and I'm pointing to everybody in the world who's watching this, are part of the solution and the future. So I encourage you to get involved and get feisty, get feisty.
Yeah.
Any last comments from my panelists before we peace out, as we say here in Malibu?
No, keep the hope,
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
everyone has the ability to be a change maker. That's the one message I think I'd like to leave with everybody. It doesn't matter what you do or where you live, and you can be a change maker within your home, within your community, or nationally. It just takes action. You have to stand up and go and actually do something about it. And there are a lot of kids out there that need us to do that, because our future is their future. And everything we do, the legacy we leave, the only legacy that I believe personally is worthwhile leaving is a future for the next generation. After all, I mean, we can't take the goods that we collect, the consumerism that we do with us. What we can take with us is the knowledge that we've left the world a better place for our kids.
I agree. You can't, with our children, we're actually borrowing from the future to take care of what we need right now, which is being greedy. I think everybody can, has the power of choice. As Sergio mentioned, every time you have a meal, you got power to choose, things that are natural, that don't have to be wrapped in plastic, right? You can make the right choices. So, and then get involved locally and change your local government.
Deia, any last words?
I just think it's important to have a strong vision of where you want to go. And then once you're on that trajectory, all your decisions will fall in line with that. So you can be active in the present and with an eye toward the future.
Perfect. Sergio?
No, I'm just hopeful for the future. And I'm thankful for this community.
And we thank you for all the great work you've done too, Sergio. As always, Julie Anderson gets the last word. I think we're getting the hook. This is probably supposed to be an hour, but frankly, I'd like to keep talking with you guys for a very long time, and we've gone way over. But, I can't stop a good thing. Julie?
Well, thank you to everyone. Thank you, Craig, Sergio, Deia, Louie, William. This has been extremely interesting. We just want to share a reminder that there are book winners right now. I think there's going to be a screen coming up. I want to thank all of our sponsors, especially our presenting sponsor, Montes Wine. It's Chilean brand with products all available in over 100 countries. Avocado Mattress, Bamboo Brush, Foamy, NatraCare, and One Tree Planted, and our global media partner, EcoWatch. All of these products are sponsors, and they also offer plastic-free products. So these are leaders in ways going forward in terms of consumers. So we want to thank all of them. I'd like to announce the book winners really quickly. For those that are around, we have Alejandra Lara, Claudia Bahaman, Sophia Pavlato, Raymond Sweet, and Taya Johnson. We will be sending you a book soon. And I also like to remind everyone, tomorrow we're having another panel on climate change's impact on the wine industry. I think this touches on, the environment, climate change and growth, and specifically our wine industry. Heck, that's something very important. So I hope to see all of you tomorrow at that webinar. Thank you again to all the panelists and the participants, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Julie, thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys.